In this video, we're going to talk about getting to the initialized state on a subtractive synthesizer, what it is and why it's useful. Starting with why it's useful, all subtractive synthesizers follow that same basic signal flow of oscillator, filter, amplifier, with a lot of additional bells and whistles. And it's those additional bells and whistles that many times maybe trick some people, but also define what makes one synthesizer different to another. It's that along with just the built-in sound engine. And so what you need to do when you're somebody brand new to making music or trying to compare synthesizer X to synthesizer Y is get the instrument to a default state so that when you are experimenting and creating sounds, you'll be able to quickly identify what makes this instrument different to the other one, not only in actual features on the interface, but also with the sound engine itself. So why does this sawtooth wave and filter sound different to the other sawtooth wave and filter? And it's not really about trying to determine if one is better than another, rather, what are the differences and when would this instrument be useful to me versus when the other one would be useful to me. So many times now you're going to find that instruments have a built-in initialized state, or when you load it up, it's initialized. And initialized just means that you're at the very basic building block. So it's the most basic of foundations. And in the case of a subtractive synthesizer, that would be a single oscillator generating a sawtooth waveform, no filtering occurring, with a gate message on the amplitude envelope. So I'm going to walk you through my process of breaking down a patch to the initialized state, and it's something that you can do with pretty much any subtractive synthesizer. And along the way, I'll just be talking about how you're starting to maybe hear and pick up on some of these differences with these various instruments. And remember that some instruments will by default give you an initialize button that you can click on, and by all means use that, because I think it's more useful to build a sound up from nothing. I think you learn more that way than you do trying to break down complex patches, but that's just my opinion. So here's the sound and the polysynth that we're starting with. So we can hear that this is a very complex sound. And the first thing that you want to do is determine if there are any effects built into the instrument. And if there are any effects, go in and shut those off right away, either by just enabling or disabling them, or in the case of this program, we can actually straight up delete all of the additional effects that we had in the instrument. So now when we listen back, it just sounds a little bit louder and brighter, but not that much different. So we know that most of the bulk of what's happening is happening within the synthesis engine, which is useful to know. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to go and find all of the different modulation sources, or if I can find a modulation matrix, that would be ideal, because that's going to give me the mod source, the mod destination, and the amount of modulation that's being applied. This instrument is a little bit different, but here on the far right, we have a variety of modulation sources. For example, velocity, how hard or how soft I hit a key. Key tracking, all right? If I play low on the keyboard, is that going to impact where any of these knobs are set as compared to when I play higher up? Timbre, that's unique to this instrument. We have our filter envelope, which is right here, so it can control more than just the filter if it's mapped anywhere else. The amplitude envelope, the mod wheel, and then also we have here aftertouch. So if you hit a key, if you have a MIDI keyboard that gives you aftertouch, you'll be able to press it down even further, and that may be controlling something in this instrument. We also have our LFOs, right? Our low frequency oscillators. We know that these can be used as a modulation source from last week. And then we have those amplifier envelopes as well as a filter envelope, which we can see obviously right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I want to just see what these are mapped to or what they're routed to. And I can see that velocity is going to filter frequency. So I'm just going to go ahead and clear that. Key tracking is going to filter oscillator FM, which is this parameter right here. Just going to go in and clear that. Timbre, it's on nothing. The filter envelope's on nothing. Amplitude envelope's on nothing. Mod wheel on nothing. As well as then the aftertouch being on nothing as well. If I look at my LFOs, I can see that LFO1 is going to quite a few parameters here. So I'm just going to go ahead and clear all of those, and we can then see how many of the things here on the oscillator, they just snapped. So they're now no longer being affected by that LFO. LFO2 is doing nothing. LFO3, we can see is messing with pitch. So when I hit a note, you can see that little blue bar jumping back and forth. That's corresponding to this LFO here. So if I clear that, we now have more or less a static sound. But what you're going to know about this instrument, something you're going to figure out quickly, is that you also have here macro controls. All right. And when you see some of these are grayed out, like these two are grayed out, these were probably corresponding to some of the effects that we got rid of. But there are other things that are still, lit up as the knob itself is lit up. For example, the stab. If I right click on this, I can see that this knob is corresponding to the amplitude envelope's decay amount, the attack amount, and also the filter envelope. If I bring that up, okay, we can start to see things here in the amp changing. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to clear all of those. So now we have back to where now we have something that's static, even if I move this knob. And I can go in here and I can just clear all of these. Oscillator mix, get rid of. Stabilize, get rid of. Output, I'll even get rid of, and then I'll have to adjust that over here. And I would count these knobs, if you have macro knobs, as another modulation source, because it really is that simple. If I go in here and I put this onto filter frequency, as I change this, we're going to see the impact that has. So it really is a modulation source. It's just something that you typically are manually controlling. This one's been flipped into a bipolar mode. I'm just going to get rid of that. Now we don't have to worry about those macro controls and we can focus on the instrument. So we focused on the LFOs, some of these modulation sources, and now we can get into our main envelope generators. So if we want to get the gate message, we already know how to set this up. We also have the filter. This is setting the depth right here. If I get rid of that, it should be a static sound. But I think because we have this mix of oscillators, we're hearing a little bit of like a phasing type effect. But this is having no impact as I change it because no depth has been set here. We have a low pass, so we don't want to have any filtering going on. We can open that right up. Get rid of the resonance. Remove the key tracking. Remove the oscillator FM. And now we just have a balance of our oscillators. So if I want to take this and have it focused all on just the top oscillator, I move this over to the left. And hopefully what you're noticing is that I'm moving pretty much from left to right. So it's the opposite of the signal flow. That's how I like to break these down. And then it can go pretty quick. Get rid of the oscillator, sync in here, get our shape to a sawtooth wave, one voice. Adjust any of the phases. And with this instrument, I can double click and bring things back to their default. We should now just have a saw wave. But you'll notice if I go to the other side, we're immediately greeted with a very different timbre. So I'm just going to break this down in the same way. And there you have it, okay? This is your pretty much straightforward initialized patch, from which I could then build up, obviously, and start to go the other way. I could add more voices. And then we could go in and add additional effects, more modulation sources, etc. But that's the way that I would break it down to then start to build it up. And we're going to look at a few more examples. Up next, we're going to be looking at an analog example. And I would define this instrument as analog because it is emulating an actual hardware instrument, the Mini Moog. And when you bring this one up, by default, it doesn't give you any kind of initialized state. And if I go and I look through the various snapshots, I'm not seeing anything that would correspond with an initialized patch, aka just that buzzing sawtooth. So we can pick something here at complete random if we want. let's see, let's just go in and find something that has an interesting name. How about radioactive? Kind of underwhelming, but it's not our sawtooth wave, so we can work with this and we can bring it back to an initialized state. I'm just going to begin by bringing the volume down a little bit. All right, we're good to go now. So the first thing I need to check for are any kind of effects that I need to turn off. In this instrument, I'm not seeing an effects section, but what I do see are a couple of controls that are a little bit foreign to me. One of those being load and one of those being feedback. I'm going to assume that since this is in the mixer section, these are both corresponding to some kind of a distortion that would occur. So if I bring load up, not having the biggest difference in the world there, but I do think that it's overloading the amplifier. It's going to add in some nice harmonic distortion. We also have feedback. By default, that's turned off, but if I listen to it, that certainly makes a big impact. Let's go ahead and just get rid of it since it's not going to be getting us closer to a sawtooth wave. Next thing I need to look for are any kind of modulators here. So we have a couple of different envelopes. We have a filter envelope. We have an amplitude envelope. I don't see any LFOs, but actually this instrument here, oscillator 3, can operate like an LFO. In this example, it's not really doing that. But for some reason, it has some of these settings turned on. I'm not entirely sure why that is. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of oscillator 3, bring that down to low, turn off the key tracking, bring this back. It's not having any impact on the sound as of now. We'll talk a lot more about this later on when we're creating some sounds with this instrument. All right, but over to the envelopes here. This is kind of special. This instrument doesn't have an ADSR. It has an ADS with an optional R, whereas when this is enabled, as both are enabled on the amplitude envelope and on the filter envelope, the decay is actually operating like release. So you'll see that we get this very long release. I've let go of the key. It's now releasing, taking a very long time. If I bring the sustain level down, I hold a key, you'll hear how it will decay down. And when I let go, we get the release then, right? So it speeds that process up a little bit, but one more time. It starts to decay. I let go, and then we get that release timing. So I'm just going to turn that off for now because we don't need release to make a gate message, right? All we need are attack and decay all the way down, sustain all the way up. And we can do the same thing with the filter envelope, right? We're getting much closer to just a basic sawtooth wave now. We move up to the filter itself, and we can do is take this MM is still a low pass, bring that all the way up, bring the resonance all the way down, and bring contour down. So contour is the same thing as EG you saw in the polysynth. This is just setting the depth of how much modulation could occur. So when this is up and we bring this decay level like this, you're going to hear the sound be really bright and then come down. If I turn the contour off, right, we're just hearing whatever we have set there with the filter cutoff. So I bring these guys back up. All right, we're very, very close. In fact, we're basically already there. Just a couple things we're going to change. One is we have this noise turned on. We don't need that. We can get rid of it. Oscillator 2 is turned on, but technically we're not getting any mix of that. As I bring it up, we're obviously hearing it. I can turn that off. So now we are just left with oscillator 1. But we have a square instead of a saw, so let's find our sawtooth. There it is. And just like that, we have our initialized patch, which we could then go and save into our user library, something that I have already done here. You can see that there's a user bank, and I've created a init patch. I've never saved anything else because this is just such a quick and easy instrument to program that I don't really need to save presets for it. But you obviously can do that if you want. So there you go, another example of how to get to an initialized state using the method that I've already discussed. We're now looking at Serum, and as you can see, it conveniently loads up with just a sawtooth wave, no filter, gate message happening down here in the amplitude envelope. So in theory, we could just start creating our sound, adding in another oscillator, working with the filter, our modulation sources, effects, etc. But let's just go through how we'd break this down using the same method, kind of a from right to left method, if you will, signal flow wise as compared to left to right. So I'll just go in here and let's grab some kind of a pad. This is a pretty cool sound. This is a great one to break down because there's a lot of different modulation sources going on here. But first things first, let's go into the effects section and turn off all of these effects. These are clearly having a big impact on the final sound. So I turn those off. We go back into the main page of the instrument. So let's break down these different modulation sources. We could go to the matrix page and we could actually go and do it all from here if we wanted to, but I find it easier to work with from the synth page itself because it's going to also show us what these are controlling. So we begin over here with velocity, again, how hard or soft you hit the key. And if I reach way over onto my MIDI keyboard, you're going to see that the things highlighted up here in blue are what's being controlled and the depth like so. Okay, so we can see that velocity is going to cut off, verb, which has now been turned off, some of these other effects things that have been turned off, also to volume of the oscillators and envelope 1 attack. The one you're really going to hear, though, is the cutoff. So let me reach way over. So we get all of that great feedback here where you can see where it is I'm hitting it on the scale and exactly what's going on. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to start by initializing the graph just to bring that back to a standard linear line. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to remove all destinations. And just like that, it gets rid of all those destinations. And from the matrix side of things, you can see a lot of places that were filled in have now been cleared out. Moving over, we have our LFOs. This LFO is controlling the frequency, the filter, the cutoff again. Just go in here, remove that destination, LFO 1. That's controlling resonance. And let's see, what else is it controlling? I don't see anything from the front page, so probably one of the effects. It says envelope 2 release. Okay, so if I go to envelope 2, we can see the release. There you go. All right, we can match that up pretty quickly. Go in here, remove that destination. Remove all destinations. We come to envelope 2. We can see envelope 2 is controlling the level of oscillator 2. We'll go in here, remove that destination. Envelope 1, this is actually our amplitude envelope. Right, you can hear that. So why don't we go and break this down and create just our standard gate message. No attack, full sustain. All right, we're getting a little bit of a click, so we can add a little release in. Get rid of that click like so. Next, we have the mod wheel, and the mod wheel is controlling a lot of things, including cutoff, as well as 5 other destinations. At this point, is it really worth like highlighting all of those? Probably not. Let's just remove them all. And then we also do have here a couple of macros, and so these can be routed to anything you want to route them to. At this point, we're not getting much sound, but you can see how that's working. This was going on to warp as well as one of the effects. So we just get rid of that. All right. We're now getting much closer, and we can basically hear nothing at this point, especially because the filter, the cutoff is so low. So I'm just going to turn the filter off. Now we're basically back to our oscillators. We only need one oscillator for this, and we want that oscillator to be a sawtooth wave. So let's come in here to oscillator A. Let's go into the wavetable, and we can see we just have the one selected. So it should be easy enough for me to come in here, choose just saw, bring it down. This isn't looking like just a sawtooth wave though. Oh, that's because we have something happening here with the wave. We have an effect going on the wavetable. We have two voices. All we need is one. Don't need to worry about detune. Let's bring the octave back up, the semitone down. Still hearing a second oscillator. That's because we have a sub working on here. Get rid of the sub. And there you are, back to your initialized state. But of course, a lot easier way to do this would be to just go into the menu here and choose to initialize the preset.